Let me say hello, I'm Toby. I'm a researcher at the University of Hamburg in the northern part of Germany. My other hat that I'm wearing is a GNOME hat, so I'm also active in the GNOME project, and within the GNOME project I'm trying to, increase the privacy and security aspects of, your computing. And today I'm here, or in this slot, I'm here to present research that we've conducted in our lab in Hamburg. So good to have experts here. That's amazing. Brilliant stuff. So what was the fix? Just push the button, or? Good. Perfect. Right. Probably with the right tension on the button. Right. This is the computer stuff. Actually, I tried to push this new line of research which is theological computer science, because with computing everything is non-deterministic and you need to sacrifice childs and have demons and everything. So, but that's for another talk. So as I said, I have a few hats. One is this research hat from my university. The other is my GNOME hat. And today, or in this very slot, I want to talk about some research we've done in what we call core internet protocols regarding tracking users' privacy aspects in these protocols. And I have to name my colleagues. I will refer to a few papers that we've written and published. So if you want to know more about several graphs or several strategies that I will present, I will have the pointers in the slides. So, tracking in internet protocols, in order to understand what the issue is, what the scenario is, let me ask you to briefly think about what happens if you type some address in your browser and hit enter, and then the next few milliseconds or seconds, what happens? And now we could do that interactively as a quiz and so on, but we don't have so much time, so I'll tell you what happens. We have many round trips back and forth, and it starts with the DNS, and then eventually you have the IP address, then you open a TCP connection, and then you send your TLS request because we want to push encrypted communication forward, and eventually here down below you have your payload. This is what you actually want to send to the other party. The stuff before is the overhead involved in connecting to that web server in this case. Arguably, bandwidth is not so much of an issue these days. I mean, of course, you could always want more, and you're never satisfied with the amount of bandwidth you have. But arguably, latency is much more important these days than bandwidth. And let's just make that as an assumption, right? If an academic doesn't have any data to back things up, we just assume that it's the case. And we just assume, that latency is an issue. So people want to reduce the number of round trips here, the number of times back and forth. And thinking that this makes the application more snappy, and users are more happy when they have snappy websites. And in fact, there was I think it was the motivation, like the paper that introduced Quick. When Google introduced Quick, I think they conducted research in on their YouTube platform. And I remember something like Google claiming having, and now I make a number up, 30% more revenue when they have clients connecting via Quick, because then people are less likely to just prematurely abort the connection and not watch the video and the advertisement. So maybe it's not 30%, maybe it's 13%, but even then, saving 1 or 2 round trips does have an impact on people like Google or entities like Google when they terminate loads of connections. Then saving a few round trips is good. Anyway. So this is the standard connection establishment as of today. And what do people do to reduce the number of round trips? People do things like this. So there's a few mechanisms. One is TCP fast open. There's TLS session resumption, which you may be more familiar with. And then there's Quick, which will be the new, or will be the base for the HTTP3 protocol. So these are mechanisms to reduce the round trips. And we had a look at the privacy properties in these protocols, because maybe Google is interested in making your connection faster, giving you a more pleasant experience while browsing the videos, but maybe, just maybe, it's a hidden tracking mechanism, that nobody thought of, and it's the grand evil plan, and now everything comes together, and then, they know everything. So we had a look, but before discussing these in more detail, let's have a look at those. This is quick, and we don't really need to understand each and every line item there. What we will see is that there's a connection establishment made by the client, and then at the end of the day, we get like some token from the server, which we can then, in our subsequent request, use here. So this is the initial connection establishment, and this is the sort of resumption. When you come back later, then you save one round trip, and you do that because you share state with the server. You have established this, this state, which is encoded in this, cookie or token, whatever you want to call it. And eventually you send it back so that the server will know who you were or who you are and can then link your state. So this is, it's a very brief overview of a quick, right? It's of course, there's many more aspects to this, but this is the core aspect that we were interested in. TCP fast open works similarly. It's in TCP, there's this three-way handshake, right? We send our SYN, and then we get the response back, and then we again send the ACK. And modern systems, they only push the payload with this third packet there, with the ACK. Interestingly enough, there's nothing preventing you from already sending your payload in the initial SYN. But turns out in real life people are bad, and on the internet people are especially bad. So the servers don't hold state for your initial SYN. In fact, servers are so afraid of keeping state that they don't even want to hold the state of your connection ID or TCP ID, and instead tend to use something like SYN cookies, which is a mitigation for a DOS attack, so that the server does not need to maintain even these few bytes of TCP session ID. They would be even more afraid of keeping 1,500 bytes of payload from your initial TCP SYN. Having said that, Facebook thought it'd be clever if we still found a mechanism to send payload in our in our initial packet. So how does that work? Facebook thought it'd be reasonable that if you established a connection once, this is regular TCP, this is fast open. If you established a connection once, then you're deemed good enough to come back a second time with the payload already in the first packet. Assuming that if you're a botnet or whatever, then you can possibly not establish a full connection, and then it's a trade-off they made. They say if you came once and you've had established a connection once, then we trust you that you're good enough that you can come back a second time, and we're happy to then accept your payload in the first packet. So how does that work? You may see here is an addition compared to, this is regular TCP, you see the SYN and the ACK, and you see here is the cookie. And the cookie is an opaque blob. It's a few bytes, I think something between 8 and 16 bytes that the server sends you. And then you can see here in the fast open case, we not only send our SYN flag, we also send these few bytes back to the server. And the server then, checks that the cookie matches its expectations and then accepts your data that you've pushed here. Here's the payload that we want to send. And there's a few technical details such that this cookie, of course, does not have to make the server maintain state, because that's what we were afraid of, right? So what does this mechanism do? That's probably arguably the clever part of it. It's a MAC over the metadata. And in the case of Linux, it's the MAC over the source IP address and the target IP address. Maybe even the ports, I forgot. And then the server, when you come back, the server just needs to recompute the MAC of the metadata and see whether it matches the cookie, and in that case, you're good enough. All right, so this is fast open, and the attentive reader may already see some problems with these schemes regarding tracking and so on, but we come back to that later. Let's first talk about session resumption. The idea is very similar. You establish a connection once, and then you ought to be good enough to come back, In the case of TLS, it's a bit more complicated because we have negotiated encryption keys, right? And there's a few mechanisms, well, actually two main ones in TLS 1.2, and then there's pre-shared keys in TLS 1.3, that allow you to tell the server that you've been here before, you've had a connection before. I am the client, I've had a connection with you before. Here's my state. Please, server, let's reuse that state. Is that okay with you? That's roughly how session tickets work. There's these two mechanisms. Session tickets is, let's start with the session ID one. Everybody remembers the TCP fast open cookie I've had before. That was only like a few bytes, right? Only sort of, if you want to find an abstraction, it's only your ID, your number of, your ID, your running number of connections that you've established. So that, and then the server could look it up in a database. This is what session IDs are. So you get 16 bytes or so that identify you, and then the server has to pull the state from somewhere, like from a database or so, and then reuse that state. Turned out servers are lazy. They don't want to maintain the state, so they serialize all the state of the TLS connection in a relatively large, what they call ticket. And then the server, the client, sends this ticket back each and every time it wants to connect, trying to coerce the server into deserializing the state and then, taking it from there and resuming the connection. That works well. And with the TLS 1.3, everybody ought to use it. These tickets are even encrypted. That was not the case before. So that's good. How does that work? This is TLS 1.2. We have our client hello, we have the server hello, and then eventually the server, we indicate that we have support for session tickets, that we want one, and then we eventually get this session ticket, and when we re-establish the connection, we send the session ticket back in our client hello. So we tell the server, here's my ticket that you've given me before. Would you please reuse that state? And then we can save the relatively expensive negotiation of a shared key. So that's great. That's a good mechanism. And if you've listened carefully, and if you have the attacker mindset, then you notice the problems, which are that, you get the state from the server, and the server needs to somehow, reuse the state from before. So there's nothing preventing the server from linking these requests, right? There's the server, by definition, the server needs to know who you were before in order to reuse this keying material that you've established before. And in the case of TLS, it's the session ticket, obviously, could be the session ID too, but it's not that prevalent. And the TCP fast open case, we have this cookie. You remember we had this 8 bytes that we get from the server, and turns out that if you send it back to the server, then, surprise, surprise, the server learns who you were. Even worse, a network-based attacker, a passive attacker, like me now when I'm snooping all your wireless connections, I can see what token you receive from the server, and then I can see you later when you send this token back. And at least in the TCP case and in the TLS 1.2 case, because these tokens are sent in as plain text. Oh, and similar with this quick token that I've mentioned before. So that's a problem, right? Because now we have, especially in the TLS case, because we wanted to use TLS in the first place to protect our privacy. And now what happened? Now we're leaking not only to the server, like who we were, which may be fair enough, right? If you're connecting to Facebook, it's, maybe you're not so much concerned that Facebook learns who you were. But even worse, your network-based attacker can now re-identify you based on this privacy-preserving protocol that you're trying to use, which is TLS. And it's a complicated problem because we have this inherent conflict of what we're trying to achieve in terms of performance with what we're trying to achieve in terms of privacy. You could say now, I don't use any of these mechanisms and then I'm good. And you're right, you could do that. You could simply not use TLS resumption. In fairness, though, you'd have to configure all your libraries to not do that because they tend to give you the advantage of a quicker connection establishment. But you could do that. You could opt out. And what we ought to try, though, is to make it harder, to make these simplest attacks harder, to these tracking attacks, if you want to call them that, right? That the passive network attacker is not able to link your requests, that would be already a good step, right? Then, well, we would save some of our privacy when we send these cookies or tokens back to the server. So how prevalent is that? How much of a problem is that really, this resumption case? This is Alexa top million, I think. Yeah, 1 million. It's this proprietary top list of website made by Amazon. And what we can see here is that only 4% of the internet, let's call it the internet, is not using any form of session resumption. Conversely, the rest does. We can say that the internet uses TLS session resumption, well, not only to make your experience better, but also to save some CPU cycles and round trips, as we've learned before. So potentially, these are all tracking you through like the mechanism we've seen before. And what does that even mean to track? Like, how big of an issue is this tracking problem, say? We've measured for how long servers advertise that they can track you. This is my negative interpretation. Their interpretation is for how long this key is valid now. And we have also measured how long clients actually reuse this token, like this, well, this tracking cookie, if you want to call it that. So, turns out that self-advertised tracking time is roughly 24 hours. There's a few exceptions. I think Google and Facebook were, like, they had long tracking periods. And there is, well, when you reconnect, then you get a cutoff here at about 1,000 minutes or so, when clients tend to not send it back for whatever reason. By investigating the clients more closely, we see this behavior, which is that, well, clients keep the session ID, which is this relatively short token, for this long, and the session ticket, which is this rather large, well, state for that long. And we see things like anything from 30 minutes to a day, or a day is the longest. And then the question is, can we extend this period? You know, we have clients, because clients are not necessarily dumb. They know it's a problem, you know, that you can be tracked. So clients try to prevent you from being tracked. So what do? Well, they let this token time out. And in this case, they let the token time out in 30 minutes, or here in 1 day. And then the question is, could we, as a smart attacker, somehow prolong this period? You know, could we somehow track users for longer than that? And yes, it's possible. If we think of an attacker like this, like a third party, you know, you're Google AdSense or whatever, and you have a website A and a website B, and A being, let's say, Facebook, and B being, say, eBay, and both include content from this third party, say Google AdWords or whatever it is. And then, because you're browsing website A, you're establishing a connection to Google. Google gives you their session ticket. This is TLS 1.3 now, by the way. I thought I'd throw some more modern stuff in. This is a TLS 1.3 handshake. And then when you connect to website B, to eBay, you also establish a connection to Google. And because you're reusing your session ticket, or in TLS 1.3, it's the key share, then Google can link your two requests together. And again, your browser might extend the period in which this token is valid. And this is a measurement of how long you can actually track users using this method. It's based on data we have acquired of real browsing behavior. And we see that this is the reconnection time of when users reconnect to a website for whatever reason, not necessarily directly, but also indirectly. And we've measured that you can track users for like very long times. You find details in this paper there. It's quite interesting research. So what do we do to like prevent this? Well, how about we do not send plaintext tokens in first place? Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, it would be so good to have more encryption on the link layer. Yeah, woo, everybody should be in favor of that. And yeah, how about we encrypt these tokens using, well, some mechanism that we don't have yet. In fact, this quick token is not yet encrypted. How about we just encrypt that? The fast open cookie is not encrypted yet. How about we encrypt that? And in TLS, it's easy though because TLS 1.3 encrypts our session ticket. That's good. So let's not focus on this one because we've talked a bit about quick. Let's talk about the fast open case. In fast open, we have the problem that we are on the TCP layer, and TCP has no encryption yet. And we, at the same time, require to not incur state on the server side, because it ought to be cheap for the server. So our options here are limited. What we came up with is to combine these two layers, that is the TLS layer and the TCP layer, to send the token over the encrypted channel. Yeah, that's the idea, and it then looks like this. You have your TCP connection establishment, you send your TLS client hello, and you get this cookie, this TCP fast open cookie back in this encrypted channel. And then you have the problem of feeding it back to Linux, because, well, somehow Linux needs to know about this cookie. So we introduced two new sock opts. These are socket options we needed to introduce to make this happen. It's, some sock opt to get and set the cookie on a socket, and on the server side we need to actually generate this cookie in order to, for the client to connect back. And this is the patch. It's like 200 lines, more or less. So it's easy enough to get into Linux. It's not terribly complicated to bring more privacy to these protocols. On the TLS side, we've used Wolf SSL. They have a booth here also, I think in H. Good guys. I can highly recommend talking to those people. They're very nice. And Wolf SSL we've patched such that the cookie comes over TLS, and then we have this patch of also roughly 200 lines, and it's a minimal overhead. We have some more ideas how to, further increase performance and privacy of these protocols by combining these layers. And the core ideas are to somehow prefetch data and send them over an encrypted link. And there's some more applications we could, or some more protocols we could treat that way. My time is up, I was told. If you have any comments, questions, whatever, you're very welcome to contact me via email or personally. And I don't know whether we have time for questions. I'm fearing not. But I will stick around. Thank you very much.